Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jill. If you're new, then hello, welcome. I do a lot of style and beauty videos. A lot of them are pretty basic, relatable, more like everyday kind of feel. And then I've also started doing this blogging series where I talk all about the influencer industry and kind of all of the different facets that are involved in that, whether it's like contracts, sponsored posts, etc., etc. So I have two videos before this. If you haven't seen them, I would definitely take a look at those first before we go into contracts. This is probably going to be fairly long, but a lot of this information I wish that I would have known going into this. Contracts are very scary. They're scary in general, and also contract law is just incredibly in-depth and complex, and it can be a lot, you know, especially when you are just getting started and you don't have very much experience and you're working for yourself. Contracts can be really overwhelming and scary and long, and so I just kind of wanted to break down a few important things and tell you what I wish that I would have known when I got started. Before we jump in, I will just go over what I'm wearing and my jewelry, since I usually get questions on it. So my jacket is from H&M. Actually, my sweater is as well. I have an H&M haul that I recently did that I will link, so you guys should definitely check that out. This necklace is from my collection with True Curated. This is Majuri. My signet ring is from my True Curated Deco collection. It's probably my favorite piece, I guess, if I had to choose. I believe we still have some pre-order rings available with that. And this is Lisa Goslin, David Yurman, Leah Alexandra, Majuri. This is my engagement ring. This is a True Curated pave band. This is Majuri. Earrings, these are all True Curated, as well as the charm. These are from my Deco collection. These kind of like simple everyday hoops that I wear all the time. In case you're interested, my Deco collection that I did with them, I believe there are some things still available, but it is all solid 10 karat gold. So I wear these pieces all the time. I shower in them. I would go swimming in them if it was in the middle of winter and we weren't in a pandemic and I couldn't go anywhere. The owner, Tori, really understands that paying for demi-fine solid gold jewelry, you want to be able to wear it all the time. So it's amazing quality. And I love that about her pieces. So, okay, let's get into it. Because I work with an agency now, my agency has their own contract that they'll have the brand or company sign, and then not always, but with the larger companies, they will also have a contract that they want us to sign. And I always read through my contracts, not line by line, every single contract, because part of my manager's job is to go over that and go back and forth with the brand if there's any issues anyway. But I have done this for the first maybe 4 years of my career. Although I'm obviously not an expert, I have a lot more experience with this. Okay, I have a few things written down, so if I look down, I just want to make sure that I stay on topic. So I'll kind of go over a few basics on the contract, and then we will get into a few more complex issues. There are a few things that most contracts have, such as what's called a term, which is basically how long the contract lasts for. That's something that you really want to be aware of as an influencer. A lot of the time, it'll be a few weeks or a few months. Then they'll have things like deliverables included. So what are you providing the brand with in exchange for how much payment? So deliverables will be, one YouTube video, one Instagram story series. You want to make sure that they specify how many slides that is. Usually it's 3 to 5 slides. This has been something that I've had to navigate a little bit, just as an aside, but with the Instagram stories, if a brand says one Instagram story, they don't always mean one slide. It'll be kind of a series of slides that makes up a whole story in their mind. Just FYI. So then there's obviously the fees and payment. Something in terms of payment that you definitely want to include is late fees. You'll have net 30, net 60, net 90, which basically means the amount of days after the work has been done that the person has to pay you. And sometimes a lot of these larger brands can be really late and they don't care. And so you basically have to spend a lot of your time like tracking this down, and it's a good idea to add in a late fee in there. So for example, you would have, you know, any invoices that are not paid within 30 days, 60 days, whatever, will have a 5% interest. And then you can have that go up over time as well. And sometimes that's a deterrent for those brands. And sometimes it's just a huge pain in the ass and they don't care. And a lot of freelancers will know that so much of your time is spent chasing these people down, which is another benefit to having an agency or management. It's basically their job for the brand to pay your agency, and then your agency pays you directly. So they have to deal with all of that. And I know that it's still really difficult for agencies to get paid too. But there was one company, this was years and years ago, when I was just by myself and just getting started, and they didn't pay me for I think 11 months. The bottom line is that it's just not very much money for them and they don't care. But you know, at the end of the day, like, it's still your job, it's your income, and it's so frustrating. I think I had to get somebody who I knew, who knew somebody at the company, to make a call to even, like, it was just, it's a nightmare. So that's something that you might want to include in your contracts. Another thing in terms of payment is to try and get 50% upon signing. This doesn't always happen. I'm pretty sure it's not mandatory on my contracts, but a lot of the time you want to get 50% of what you're owed upon signing. Obviously that just ensures that, you know, you get paid more on time, that you have more of an income at the beginning, so you're not waiting until the very end. Just because with contractual work like this and freelance work, you don't have a normal income. It's not like you have any kind of paycheck structure. So, you know, some months you can have like a large amount coming in and some months you have nothing. So the 50% on signing is a good idea if you can. Credit when reposting. So just have in there that if a brand is going to repost your work, that credit is always given. You want to make sure that obviously your name is on your work, especially if a larger brand is reposting that. There could be an increase in followers or exposure for you from that. So that's a good idea to have in there. In terms of confidentiality, it's just something that you want to be aware of. I know that this comes up more and more as the influencer industry gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and people start to become more transparent with other influencers and their audience, etc., etc. And I think it's great that people are being really open, but you also really want to be aware that there usually is a confidentiality clause in your agreement. And especially if you're on like an Instagram group or a Facebook group and you're talking about any kind of specifics, like how much you got paid for a brand or basically anything in the contract, the brand can sue you. And your contract can be terminated and it can be a whole big thing. So just definitely something to be aware of. I think there's a fine line between being transparent and, you know, kind of talking about your rates as a whole, even with another influencer, you know, giving like your base rates. But you don't want to be talking to somebody who's also in talks with a specific brand and telling them exactly what you're getting paid, and then them going back to the brand and being like, well, you're paying Jill this much money, how come you're not paying me? That's definitely a breach of contract, and it's something that you want to be aware of. Something else that is normal in contracts, especially for large companies, is the no employment clause, which basically just means that you're an independent contractor and you don't work for the company, and that's totally fine. That's what you are. So something else that you may want to include is revisions. So a lot of the time people will have kind of like 1 or 2 revisions that are allowed in the contract. Obviously, if there's like a huge miscommunication or if something changes with the brand, the contract may need to be renegotiated, but you don't want a brand to keep coming back and coming back and coming back with all of these different revisions. I've gone quite a few rounds with some brands, and there have definitely been times where it was like, okay, so you couldn't have just gone through everything, given me a list of the revisions that you wanted, and sent them over just that one time, and then we could have cut down all of this feedback. So you kind of just want to be careful about like revision rounds, just because it can become a really arduous process. At the end of the day, you want to get as much information as you can up front from the brand, just about what they're expecting. You want to get as much information on deliverables and specifics and inspiration, what they do want included, what they don't want included. If there's any like specific inspo posts that they really liked of yours or other people's. A lot of the time, especially with larger companies, I will do a concept sheet. Like basically I will fill out or let brands know exactly what I'm thinking in terms of the content, so that they are aware before I go in and like film everything and do all my work and all my editing and all my creativity and stuff, so that they're not coming back to me being like, we didn't expect it to look like this and we're not happy. It just kind of cuts down on back and forth and revisions, etc., etc. It's always better to have more information on both sides going in, because I think that people will be happier with the outcome. So those are kind of like the more basic things that I wanted to cover. And then these are a bit more influencer specific. They're a little bit more complex. And the first thing I want to go over is content usage rights. It's like the ways that your content can be used by the brand and for how long. So a lot of the time, a brand will have an influencer create content, and that will go live on the influencer's channel, whether it's YouTube or Instagram or TikTok, whatever. The brand will also use that content, whether it's reposting on their own accounts, whether they're using it for ads. You know, it costs brands a lot of money to put together an advertisement like that, especially like with traditional media, in terms of like putting together a photo shoot and hiring hair and makeup and having a concept and styling and and an influencer kind of does that on a smaller scale that's specific to them. And so it's an easier and cheaper way for brands to get content. Them using your content is great, and a lot of the time it can be beneficial for both people. You know, the brand can be putting your name out there as long as credit is being given, and you're providing almost like a secondary use for their content. Something that you want to be aware of though is the terms of that content usage. So you don't want to see things like in perpetuity, which basically means for the rest of time. It basically means that brands can use your content in any way they see fit for as long as they want. So you want to make sure that if they're going to be using that content for a long time, that they're paying for those usage rights. The content usage rights will be kind of in there with the terms. So the brand will have those usage rights just for the term of the contract, which, like I said, can be a few weeks, a few months, whatever. If it's a long-term contract, maybe it's like a year or two, but that's something that you want to be aware of, because if a brand is going to be using your content, you know, your photos, your videos, everything, you want to make sure you're getting paid for that. So if they want to use it longer term, then that's something that you need to renegotiate with them and make sure that you're getting paid. It's like digital usage rights, which kind of brings me on to the next point, which is called whitelisting, which is basically where an influencer grants the brand permission to use your content in an advertising context on your channel. So for example, brands are asking to be added on Facebook, which includes obviously Facebook and Instagram, as a partner. So they can go in and put money behind certain posts and kind of use it as an ad. It's kind of like a promoted or a boosted post. You know, there are a few things, like obviously you need to make sure this is a reputable brand, because you're basically giving them a background into your stats. And then again, that goes back to the content usage rights, how long can they be doing that for? What else? You want to make sure that you have an ownership clause in there. You want to make sure that you own the content that is created, and while you are creating it for a specific brand, the photos are yours, the videos are yours, and the brand can use those and pay you to use those, but what you're creating is your own. So definitely make sure that you have an ownership clause in there. Something else that brands are definitely adding in more and more is a disclosure clause. So obviously there has to be hashtag ad, sponsored, using the paid partnership tool, whatever, but brands have that in contracts now that needs to be used. And I think that's great because people should be using those anyway, but that's something that you'll see a lot more in contracts. Although I did once have a brand ask me not to use hashtag ad, and I said no. I said, you know, if something is a sponsored post, I always do it. I don't think that it's a law in Canada, but I believe it is in the States and the UK. To not do that is just bad practice, and it's not a good idea long term to build, you know, kind of rapport and trust with your audience, which is the long-term goal of being an influencer anyway. You want to build that trust and relationship with your audience so that they actually trust you when you recommend something, whether or not it's paid for. Something else to mention is what's called a termination clause. You want to make sure that you get paid for any work that was completed if the contract is terminated. So this is something that came up quite a bit during the pandemic. A lot of brands and companies were not able to produce their goods, and so obviously they didn't want to put money into marketing and promoting that. But you need to make sure that you're paid for any work that's been done if the contract is terminated. This is not usually included in brand contracts, but it's something that I would try and add in. There were campaigns where I was like 50 to 100% done, a lot of them. Content had been shot and approved and was ready to go, but the brand didn't want to post it because, you know, the pandemic was going on, it didn't feel like the right time, and also all of their production had stopped. You've still done all of your part except for the posting, and you've put all this time and effort into creating that content. You want to make sure that you're paid for that. Another thing is a clause stating that if TikTok or Instagram or YouTube or whatever remove your post, that it is not in breach of contract. Obviously, it's your responsibility to make sure that you're not putting up posts that would be removed, as long as you're following all of those guidelines. And a lot of the time, that's fairly basic stuff. You know, Instagram can be all over the place, and you're like, why is this being removed? I used your music and you're saying there's some kind of a copyright issue. You're like, what? But you want to put in the contract that that is not your fault and that's not a breach of contract, because there's technically, you know, as long as you're following all of the guidelines and doing everything that you can, that's not really your fault. In that vein, for the most part, I stay away from contracts and jobs that have kind of specific or minimum engagement rates or number of comments or clicks on, that kind of thing, because at the end of the day, you just don't know how a post is going to perform. You know, there are lots of things you can do when you're putting the post together. There are lots of best practices that you can follow, and obviously that's a large part of your job, but you don't really know. You can't guarantee that. And so if you put all of this work into it and you don't hit a specific minimum that the brand is asking for, then obviously they can void the contract and you don't get paid for any of that. Like, of course, how a post performs is definitely a large part of the job, but you know, all of that time and content creation that goes into it is really important too. Numbers are not everything. They're a lot, and brands definitely want to get analytics that show that the post is working. You know, I think that's a large part of why influencer marketing is so popular, because there are specific analytics that you can present to the brand that show that something is working, that show that this post led to this many website swipe ups, etc., etc. But to have a minimum on it can be really difficult, and it means that you can basically not get paid. Okay, and lastly, you can also consider adding in a clause that states that if your post, for whatever reason, gets hate speech or you're getting harassed in the comments of your post, that post can be removed or archived or whatever. A lot of the time in contracts, brands will say that you can't like ever remove your post, or you can't remove the sponsored post for 6 months, a year, 3 years, whatever. And that's not something that I'm in the practice of doing anyway. You know, I'm not gonna put up a sponsored post in the first place if I then just wanna pull it down. But if, you know, if you're getting harassed about something, that can be pretty serious, and the internet can be a scary and awful place. People behind keyboards can be absolutely wonderful, and you can make great connections, and they can also be terrible. So that's something to consider adding in so that you can at least have that conversation with the brand if you're getting harassed for your post. Okay, that is it for me. I think I just talked for like half an hour. So we'll see how long this ends up being. If you got to this end point, then thank you for watching. I really, really hope that this was helpful. A lot of this information I wish that I would have known going into it. You know, legalese, as they call it, can be really confusing and really scary. And so just having it broken down into more layman's term, I find was really helpful. So if you guys have any questions, please let me know. I'm always happy to chat about it, you know, privately or on a comment or whatever. Let me know if there's anything else in particular that you would like to see in this blogging series. I'm gonna cover lots of different things, everything from my blogging equipment that I use to a media kit, what to include, how I shoot and edit content, when should you get a manager, etc., etc. So let me know if there's anything in there that you specifically are interested in, or if there's anything else you want to add. And I'll see you soon. Bye.